Okay, doesn't seem to be any danger here. I should be safe. All I've got to do is move forward with caution and... Wait, what the hell is that sound? No! Welcome to a really bad review of Sekiro. Should have done twice. The story of Sekiro is an unusual one. Having completed the game, I now know better, but if I was a player that hadn't persisted, I'd have very mixed feelings towards the story. As part of its Japanese theme, a lot of the story is very metaphorical and can lack clear and concise context. Couple that with a fairly vague and roughly explained opening section, and it's easy to see how many people would be distracted or uninterested. And for me, this was one of the largest negatives of the story, the way it was told. Oh, and I'll try not to, but just to warn you. Now, as I mentioned, after completing the game, I now know better, but during the first half of the game, I didn't. And essentially the only information you're supplied with is the fact that you're adopted, you're a shinobi, and that you serve a young lad who's part of a special bloodline that has something to do with immortality. Making him the target to your enemies, and then poof! Off you go, on your bike, shinobi son, go kill bad guys and save the little dude. The way the story is told is very bold by the developers and heavily relies on the long-term investment of the individual player. And so my advice to you is, if you don't have enough hours in the day or interest in the title, don't waste your time, because honestly, it requires it. On the flip side, if you're willing to spend your precious and totally not expendable unemployed hours on this game, then you're in for what I describe as one of the most frustrating treats gaming has to offer in 2019. Cutscenes are few and far between, and information is pieced together by the player's thirst for knowledge, slowly unravelling an intriguing story of a warrior who is driven by his loyalty to his master. The story and the gameplay work hand in hand. You never feel disconnected from the two, and I honestly feel if you didn't enjoy one, then you wouldn't enjoy the other, especially the gameplay, because oh my god, this happens a lot. Despite this, almost the entirety of my playthrough, I persevered. Towards the end of the game there was a lot of back and forth, partly down to me and partly down to the game itself, but this was the only time that I felt my search to continue the story was a little bit wasteful. There was little to no indication as to what to do next, and at certain points and on more than one occasion, your progress was halted by a locked door because you'd accidentally skipped past a boss that was tucked away in some cave. Although honestly, this is my only major gripe, with the exception of the slow start in terms of storytelling. That being said, the good points definitely outweigh the bad, and overall the story was enjoyable and solid. Being an anime fan, I played through the game in Japanese, so I can't speak for the English voiceovers, but I don't think I batted an eyelid at any of the speech in the game. It was well executed, with the only complaint being the lack of cutscenes. Jeez, I never thought I'd say that. Could make the conversation a little tedious at times. You kind of felt like you were just skipping through a lot of text. The gameplay! My experience with previous titles by From Software is fairly limited. I tried my hands with Dark Souls and Bloodborne, but quickly lost interest, and there's always that risk with their games, given that they're notoriously difficult, and Sekiro is no exception to that rule. The game is brutal and unforgiving. Your health is abolished in a moment of carelessness. You're punished for continuously dying, and enemies come in such a large variety throughout the vast setting that getting used to their patterns is time consuming, to say the least. And yet, the challenge of Sekiro felt exactly as it should. A challenge. It isn't cheap, it isn't unfair, it's bloody difficult and extremely challenging, but you're presented with every tool you need to overcome every task. You're given a healthy number of options when it comes to character development. With a wide range of ways to improve your skill set, you can gather prayer beads from tough enemies to increase your vitality, you can gather collectibles to add new options to your prosthetic arm, and are rewarded with items that improve your attack power by coming out victorious against bosses. There are so many different angles you can take when approaching an enemy. Stealth, trickery and aggression are all part of a well-rounded arsenal for the player to utilise, and it rarely gets stale. In terms of combat, it's a well thought out and polished system, with only one major flaw. For a difficult game that has you on your toes constantly, some weaker enemies could just be pushed and pummeled and had little to no reaction other than blocking until you eventually destroyed them in a big, flashy cloud of smoke. It just seemed weird that 80% of encounters had to be thought out and calculated, but when all else failed, I found a concerning amount of success with the running in, arm swinging. Even so, having that disparity between hard and easier encounters did break up the feeling of studying your enemies like you're preparing for an exam. Whether it was intentional by the developers or not, I don't actually know. Outside of the combat, you're free to traverse the setting by walking, crouching or using the grapple hook to Spider-Man your way around a satisfyingly oriental style setting, all of which are utilised on a frequent basis. How helpful they actually are is a different story. The vision of the NPCs could be wildly different. There were times where I was sure I'd been spotted and yet somehow managed to nail multiple enemies with relative ease, and then I could be convinced that I'm completely well hidden or have allowed enough distance to make bold moves, only to be spotted and annihilated within seconds. It's an area of the game that I did slowly adapt to, but still never 100% figured out the exact requirements to stay hidden or not. It didn't tarnish the gameplay, but if I was to suggest an improvement, it would be to make this slightly clearer. Overall, the gameplay was impressive and well thought out. The inclusion of the stagger bar was a nice touch to force a player into switching their approach and style while still allowing time to block and think of what you could do next. It isn't without its flaws and it's far from perfect, but I left with a feeling of satisfaction and accomplishment. Speaking of satisfaction, the graphics! I mean, thankfully this is few and far between. The style itself is really nice. I don't know if my fascination with anime makes me more drawn into the Japanese setting, but I thought it was a brilliant idea. The style was well maintained throughout the game despite there being a magnitude of different and well detailed environments to explore. You do spend a lot of time moving through linear tunnels, caves and dungeon looking areas, which did come with a small level of disappointment as it does become a bit boring to look at. But when areas opened up for exploration, the graphics really came into their own with certain scenes looking fantastic. The particle effects aren't without the mention as well. Given the game was particularly gory, there's a lot of this, but as long as you aren't faint-hearted, you have to commend the developers for doing a good job, with my particular favourite being the smoke you can let off from landing a lethal blow. Probably the biggest letdown with the character models. Don't get me wrong, they aren't particularly bad in any sense, but they did fall short of the environment and effects that surrounded them. Wolfie Dude himself is well detailed and stays true to his surroundings in that sense, but did occasionally appear a little over sharpened along with some of the NPCs, making them stand out from their environments rather than seamlessly blending in like they belonged. On a whole, I have to say that the negative points were minor inclusions here. I did have to go out of my way to find things that I didn't like, and the game from start to finish was well above what you'd consider industry standard. So let's just swiftly move on to the summary. The story! Solid and interesting. Big risk with the storytelling itself and definitely not for everyone, but no major complaints. The gameplay! Impressive with a large variety of moves, collectibles and upgrades which all serve their purpose. Not without its flaws, minor areas do need ironing out, but generally top notch. The graphics! Really nice in most places and a well executed style. Small flaws and probably too much time spent in dark and bland areas, but the impressive environments were sheer quality and portrayed everything good about Sekiro. The Shinobi effect! A nice style well integrated into a familiar system. A breath of fresh air in comparison to previous From Software games. And the overall is a 7.5. If you don't have the time, patience or tolerance, this might not be for you. Otherwise, I highly recommend it. If you like this video, you can consider checking out one of my previous ones, which should be on the screen now maybe, or in a bit whenever I decide to put it there. You can also subscribe to keep up to date with new content, and follow me on Twitter maybe also. I have you can count my followers on one hand. Thanks.